Today, our last one having to do with time of Shemittah, sort of, is about the first thing, the main thing we talk about is whether women are chayav in the mitzvah of Shemittah. Okay, the chinuch has in mitzvah kufiyat beis is the mitzvah that you're not allowed to, that you have to rest in the land in Eretz Yisrael. And he says, if you want to know more about this, he doesn't say very much over there. He says, go look in mitzvah Pei Daled. What?
What's right? There's a mitzvah association on Groma.
I didn't say anything yet. I'm going to say it in a second. Yes. So he says, if you want to go know more about this mitzvah, go look at mitzvah Pei Daled, where it says that you have to give everything hefker. And the minchas chinuch in kufiyat beis. Okay, that's why I put these up here because I keep forgetting which is which. The minchas chinuch in kufiyat beis.
For today.
There's one more piece, basically. I told you. But yeah, so the Mitzvah in Kufiyat Beis says, if you look at Mitzvah Pei Daled, the Chinuch says it's for men and ladies. Okay. And out in Mitzvah Kufiyat Beis, when he says it in Kufiyat Beis, the impression is that everything that's in Pei Daled is true over here also. So he says, so the Chinuch is wondering, why is that true? Shemittah only comes once every 7 years. So if it only comes once every 7 years, it should be Mitzvah Seisha Man Krama, and why should ladies be chayav? In their state budget. So the Minchas Chinuch starts in Kufiyat Beis, I'm going to tell you what he says in Pei Daled also, but in Kufiyat Beis, where it's very short, just you have to make it hefker, which is a mitzvah say, so he says, so go look in Kufiyat Beis, that's where all the details. In Kufiyat Beis it says, all that you have to do. In Pei Daled he said you have to do all these mitzvahs. So he says, well, what's the reason for that?
He's asking on Pei Daled.
He says both.
You have to
both of them are said.
Or is it hefker? You have to be
so very good. So that's one of the things. One of the things the Mitzvah says. Correct. So we'll talk about that. But we're going to talk about it very briefly today. I'm going to just mention almost that one. We'll talk more about later in the future. I don't know where, but someplace in the future. So one of the things that the Minchas Chinuch says in Pei Daled, in Mitzvah Pei Daled, is maybe the mitzvah is not on the person at all. Okay, the mitzvah is, like he said, I've got the Malka, the land has a din into it, land has din, and you have the responsibility to carry out what you're supposed to do, but the mitzvah is not on you, the mitzvah is on the land, and therefore, it's not really a mitzvah that has to do with a person. We say, this person is chayiv or not chayiv. Everyone's got to treat the land in a certain way. Okay, that's one of his answers. He also says, in Pei Daled, he says like this. He says, when you have Perish Shvius, when you have fruit that grew during Shemitah, we spoke last time, how do you know what it is? But you have pears that grew in Shemitah, that fruit is Kaddish forever. That fruit is not a mitzvah Seisha Man Grama. That apple that you're holding in your hand, that is a sweet apple, it doesn't have a mitzvah today and not a mitzvah tomorrow. It has a mitzvah forever. Okay, that mitzvah is there all the time. He says, so maybe that's not considered mitzvah Seisha Man Grama. He says, because the mitzvah Seisha Man Grama is only mitzvah that comes and goes. But if this mitzvah doesn't come and go, the apple is going to be called forever. And he says, he wants to say that that's totally in the machlokes in the Tzitzis.
So what's the Kedusha of the apple to hefker? What's the mitzvah say? The hefker?
Making it hefker, doing beer, different parts.
All the Kedusha of the apple.
Once we've identified this apple, that this apple has the mitzvahs on it, whatever those mitzvahs are, then those mitzvahs apply forever. Those mitzvahs are not connected to time. Once we pick out our apple,
but the beer is a specific time when there's a mitzvah of beer.
No, this apple has to have beer whenever it is. There's going to be a time when it has to happen, but when you have to make it hefker, you can always take it. Okay? You always have to treat it in a certain way.
It stops.
It doesn't.
Once the beer starts, it doesn't stop.
It does. Okay, so we'll say the mitzvah say beer is.
Right, the Malach will show you what's beer.
Yes. So you want to say it has a time because when there's no more left on the field, I don't know if that's considered man grama.
That's a famous shayla. That's like Ishtavan.
Yes, correct. Correct. Okay. He doesn't talk about that part. But he's assuming that those things are not. Let's say hefker. We'll think of the hefker one as the easier one. The hefker. You're not allowed to take ownership of it. Kacha, just nothing. Just leave that there. You're not allowed to take it.
On the karka.
In the fruit. Well, it's both. There's nothing to the kaka. They can't scoop the dirt out of the ground.
The kaka at the end of the year is always hefker.
Right, so it's the fruit. They don't take your dirt. They can't get your dirt. The apple's after. So he says it's totally a machlokes in Hilchos Tzitzis. Okay? He says the famous machlokes in Hilchos Tzitzis about whether, what is it, which things are chayiv and potter in Tzitzis by night, by night there's no chiyuv of tzitzis. So does that mean during the daytime you're chayiv in tzitzis, during night you're not chayiv in tzitzis? Or the Rosh says no, it means it's a beged of a daytime beged. My shirt that I'm wearing, it's a daytime beged that's chayiv in tzitzis all the time. And a nighttime beged, my pajamas, I'm never chayiv in tzitzis. Because that's a nighttime beged. Even if I wear it during the daytime, that's how you define what's day and night. So he says, according to the Rosh, yet tzitzis is a mitzvah seishes man grama. How can it be that it's a mitzvah seishes man grama when the same beged is chayiv all the time, or the same beged is patur all the time? So that's not like what he was just saying. He was just trying to say that the apple of Shvi is, since it's not time dependent, that apple is covered forever. He says, so that's would be not like this Rosh. Okay, it would be totally this muscle. Because if you say like the Rosh, that the beged shoyam is chayiv all the time, yet it's still considered mitzvah seishes man grama because there was time, part of the cheshbon of deciding of the beged has to do with time, which beged is chayiv, but has to do with time, then perishur should be patur also. Okay, so I saw someone brought, I don't know, I wouldn't have come across this myself. The Roshach talks about this Mincha Sinuch, and he says, he disagrees. He says it's not telling this Rosh. Okay. I'm going to tell you the way I understood what he said. I can't say I got it 100%. He says like this. He says, when you have a mitzvah of tzitzis, what tells you that something is chayiv in tzitzis? How do you decide what's chayiv in tzitzis? So the criteria is, if you have a beged that has 4 corners, it's chayiv in tzitzis. That's what you have to look for. Once you have the beged that's chayiv in tzitzis, now there's a rule that there's a condition that there's something that depends on time. If it's a beged shoyim or beged shalayla, according to the Rosh, that's something that depends on time that makes you decide whether it's chayiv or patur in tzitzis. That's mitzvah seishes man grama. He says, but in Perish Shvius, it's not that if you have the time decision has to do with deciding what's actually the chayfetz shal mitzvah. What's the thing that has to do the mitzvah on it? What's the fruit that has to do the mitzvah on it? He says, so that is not totally in this Rosh. That thing has nothing to do with zman grama. That's not considered zman grama. He says that's just figuring out which is the fruit that's chayiv or patur. By tzitzis, what makes it chayiv or patur is that it has 4 corners. Having 4 corners is what makes chayiv or patur. Then on top of that, once you have the thing that's chayiv, you have tzitzis, they have a thing with 4 corners that's chayiv. Now we have a second thing that comes afterwards that says this, now it depends on time. Well, that's considered mitzvah seishes man grama. But when in the actual decision making there was time, that's not important because once we figured out what the thing is that's chayiv in the mitzvah, this apple is one of the apples that's chayiv in the rules of Shemittah, then there's no time consideration of it. It's not that's seishes man grama. Okay, now this answer that I just said, this whole the chinuch and the way Shach wants to say it, is only going to help us for the mitzvah of Peidalet, to be mafker things. If you're going to treat them with Kedusha Shvius, not going to help for mitzvah Kufi Beis. Okay, mitzvah Kufi Beis, which is what the chinuch, what I started with, mitzvah Kufi Beis, which says that you're not allowed to work the land on Shemitah, that's for sure, that's at this point seems to be for sure a mitzvah seishes man grama. Okay, so it's an assay. The Kashrus of Katzit Tishbais is an assay. So he says, so that and where we're standing at right now, this answer didn't help us for that. This answer would just help us for to be mafkir stuff, but not for this one. Okay, so the Mincha Sinuch, he says, it seems that the mitzvah of to be mafkir everything is that both of these mitzvahs, even women are chayvin. Chaim Knesset brings 4 rayas that even women are chayvin. The Mincha Sinuch doesn't say, he says, I'm not for sure. He says, but it sure seems like that. Everyone not mentioning that women are patur sure seems like they're chayvin. Chaim Knesset brings Gemaras. One Gemara talks about Chamesh Nashim, there were 5 ladies, and it talks about there who had their own fields and what they had special mitzvahs. He says there's a Mishnah about a person doesn't have to worry that his mother-in-law is going to give her daughter, meaning his wife, food that has, not followed the mitzvah of Shemitah. That's about ladies. There's a Mishnah in Gittin about ladies borrowing kelim from each other. A lady who's chashud al hashviyas, borrowing from a lady who's chashud al hashviyas. So the first two that he says, you could be matchav, that all of those have to do with beer. If you look into them, each one has to do with mitzvahs of beer. So he says, Kenzai, in those cases, you'll be matcha, that was talking about that a man had the fruit when it came to time of beer, so it was chayav in beer, and then a lady took it afterwards. He could be matcha. But his 4th raya is from a Gemara in Yuma, brings about a mush about ladies eating page shvius, and that's a lady who's doing hefset, that mitzvah pedal, a lady who's not treating it properly. So anyhow, so he has all these rayas. He just honestly his bikiyas. He rayas from all over the place. But anyhow, but everyone seems to agree that the chayv. Okay, so back to our question: why chayv? Okay, so now.
By Shabbos, when the Shemittah Shabbos is not Shemachayim Shemittah Shabbos.
Very good. Close. I didn't put that one up on the board, but yes, it's part of the same shidduch. So the chinuch says, the chinuch says in the mitzvah, he speaks at. I put up this mitzvah shin chafal because I think that's where he speaks at most clearly. Another place he says, just go look over there. Okay, there's a mitzvah to be shavus on Shmini Atzeres. Okay, I don't know why. That's not the first mitzvah where this comes up, but that's where I thought it was most clear. There's a mitzvah to be shavus on Shmini Atzeres, which is a mitzvah say, and well, if it's a mitzvah say, and it's only on Shmini Atzeres, we would all guess that it's a mitzvah shishas man krama. He says, no, it's not true. He says it's not true. He says like this. He says, the Mincha Sinuch says, what the chinuch means to say is like this. He's reading into the Mincha Sinuch. Anytime you have a mitzvah that has an asay and a lois asay component for the same mitzvah, then, since the nashim are chayiv in the lois asay, they're chayiv in the asay also. Okay? He learns that from, we say, ish or isha, Kiyas Mikol Chatas Adam, and we say Hisha Kosef Ishul Ish to tell you that if a mitzvah has an asay and a lois asay portion to it, then if you're chayiv if the lady's chayiv in the lois asay, she's chayiv in the asay also. Okay? He tells you, he says, there's no makartas in the Gemara. Okay? But that's the chinuch, the way he learns it. The chinuch is saying is that if there's an asay and a lois asay together on the same thing, then the lady, since the lady is chayiv in the lois asay, she's chayiv in the asay also. Okay? He asks on it. What do you say? That what?
They said, what's the case of Mitzvah? Right?
You want to switch seats? So, we'll come to Mike in a second. Okay, very good. Okay. If I'm not here next week, when I'm here on vacation, we can just take paper this way more. Okay, you can read the paper. I'm not sure if you can read the paper, but okay. So he asks on that we're saying that the asay and the lois asay, whoever's chayiv in the lois asay is chayiv in the asay also. So if the lady's chayiv in the asay also, even though it's makro, he asks on that there are parts. We're going to get to this in a while, 2 more sections. Okay, in a while, that in the mitzvahs of Shvius, there are some malachas daraisa that are only usher as an asay. Okay, one of the examples is charisha. Okay, it's only usher as an asay. It's not a lois asay. Satchul is sizra. That's a lois asay. But the charish of B'katz Tishbois, charisha is only an asay. So he says, well, if so, the fact that the ladies are chayiv in the lois asay when there's also an asay, let's say the B'katz Tishbois is because Satchul is sitra. You're not allowed to do that. They're chayiv in the lois asay. They're chayiv in the asay also. But when we come to parts of the mitzvah that are only an asay, like charisha, which is only an asay, then he says maybe ladies shouldn't be chayiv. It's not so clear that the chinuch knows like that. Okay? He's learning that into the chinuch. You would have understood that any time that there's a lois asay and asay, and the ladies are chayiv in the lois asay, they're now chayiv in the fullness of the asay. Not only in the parts of the asay that are perfect matches to the lois asay, but they're chayiv in all parts of the asay. Okay, he doesn't say it that way. And he says, no, by charisha it's not going to work. So the Mincha Sinuch himself says that there's even this shita that the chinuch said that if the lady is chayiv in the lois asay, she's chayiv in the asay also. He says, Tosfos argues on that. Okay, Tosfos says, by the mitzvah of Micah, the Gemara says that the mitzvah of Micah is not a mitzvah as man grama. Okay, the Gemara says that's an example of a mitzvah that is not as man grama. The implication being that were it to have been a mitzvah as man grama, then Nashim would be Baturas. It's right in the sugya of mitzvah as man grama. And it says, and Micah is, we make limudim from the fact that, from Micah, that ladies are chayiv in other mitzvahs. And Tosfos says, Tosfos says, but you should know that in most cases, there's a lois asay also on Micah, which is l'sasam dam v'sachal. There's also a lois asay in that mitzvah. He says, so the truth is that ladies would be chayiv in most of the cases, but there are certain exceptions or whatever it is, and Tosfos says it wouldn't be. So he said, the Mincha Sinuch, because you see from Tosfos that even if there's an asay and a lois asay, the fact that there is a lois asay doesn't make the lady chayiv in the asay. It doesn't go together. Okay, this idea that the chinuch says that if the lady chayiv in the lois asay, she's automatically chayiv in the asay also, he says he sees Tosfos holds on to. Okay. So the Mincha Sinuch says like this. The Ritva says, in Kedushin, the Ritva says like this. He says that we have a pasuk that tells us that ladies are not chayiv in the mitzvah of milah. Okay, that ladies are not chayiv in the mitzvah of milah. So, why do we need a pasuk that ladies are not chayiv in the mitzvah of milah? Milah is only by yom. So why don't we say mitzvah milah is a mitzvah sheshas man grama? Why do we need a pasuk to tell us that ladies are parted from the mitzvah of milah?
I thought it was the first mile.
What did you say?
Shipper was the first mile.
I don't know if it was the first one. I don't know.
It was the first mile, right.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's a good question. Not for today. Not for today. So he says. So Ritva says when we say that a lady's a part of mitzvah sheishas man groma, that only means for mitzvah sheva gufoy, mitzvahs that they do by themselves. But mitzvahs that have to do with something else, mitzvahs has to do with something else. That is not considered mitzvah sheishas man groma. Okay, so that doesn't fall into the rules of mitzvah sheishas man groma. And the mela, when we talk about mitzvah kufyud beis, about b'char shem kotz tishbois, then that's not considered mitzvah sheishas man groma. It's a mitzvah. It's not about them. It's a mitzvah for them to do on the land. Because
I'm not supposed to work character. Why is that different walk and shop? You say that it's a shaman, it's a
I don't remember. Okay, it's a fair question. I don't remember.
But I mean it's because it's in Bezdin. You know what the process over there?
That what?
I mean it's because it's Bezdin.
What do you mean because it's Bezdin?
Because if they don't do it, the Bezdin has to do it, and they That's not what it says. That's what I remember.
Okay. The Reb Chaim, we're finished with the Mitzvah. Okay. Reb Chaim Kanievsky himself says like this. He's like this. He says, we're making a mistake about the way we look at this. He says, we're looking, this really, it's very similar to what the Mitzvah said himself at the beginning, and that is like this. He says, we're looking at this as if there are, 5 mitzvahs that have to do with Shemittah, and we're looking at them individually and saying, you could be chayiv in this one and potter from this one. He says, you get it all wrong. He says, if you look in the Psukim, you see the Torah refers to all these things, basing them on the Kedusha of Shvius. The land is Kadosh, the year is Kadosh, whatever, there's something Kedusha going on during Shemitah. And that is to say, these mitzvahs, the mitzvahs are not, I have to do these bunch of details. There's one mitzvah, which is there on Shemitah, there's Kedusha to the land, there's Kedusha to the year. And whoever is part of that Kedusha, let's say a year is part of that Kedusha, he's kind of, now there are details to how you have to carry out the Kedusha of those things. He says, so the fact that, you don't look happy, is it? That what?
That's it's for it's
to connect.
When you get punched in Gemara, so all one next comes to kedusha. I mean,
okay.
It's also told that the Rishonim, if something else is going on, the mitzvah so safe, that also is going on.
Like, for example,
like Tfilas Oimer. It's told in that's what they explain the Rambam. The master Tfilas Oimer is not just going on.
Right.
Because Stone Oimer, whenever you bring the korban,
how does that connect to and here?
So we have the Ottoman, the Kedusha is going on this mitzvah to say. Because the Kedusha now have mitzvah to say. So if you say like that first, then it's not mitzvah to say.
Okay. Well, it's easier to say it by Sir Omer. Because the Torah says, after you bring the korban omer, then you should do this mitzvah. So the Torah tells us that it's connected to that. When you bring the Yom HaViyach on this korban omer, that's when you have to do it. Over here, what's Yossi's not so happy about is that the Torah does say there's Kedusha to it. And the Torah, he brings you psukim that connect the Isurim to the Kedusha. They're connected to each other. But still, it's sort of like, that's a, being Dorish time of the cross. It's like, really the Torah just gives us 5 mitzvahs. Do this and do this, gives us a bunch of mitzvahs, and it happens to mention this Kedusha. We're sort of connecting them a little bit.
So why by Shabbos also? By Kiddush, why need the Shabbos? The Kedusha of Shabbos is Machayev.
Right, same kind of a problem. Same kind of question. Okay, anyhow, when we get to this, when we talk later about whether the land has Kedusha to it, Rabbi Cement says something very similar. Okay, he doesn't bring Chaim Kanievsky, but Rabbi Cement says something similar also. So we'll talk more about it then, maybe I'll be afraid to say that. Okay, anyhow. Okay, so the one last thing about this is, like this. The Chassam Sofer, there's a true in the Chassam Sofer. He's talking about Mitzvah Sheishas Man Groma. He mentions Shemitah also. He doesn't just say it about that. He mentions specifically about Shemitah. And he says it like this. How do we know that ladies are potter from Mitzvah Sheishas Man Groma? How do we know? So the Gemara says we learn it from Tefillin, and the Gemara has a bunch of psukim, a bunch of mitzvahs that have to do with that are or are not Zman Groma. We have Tefillin and Matzah and Hakel and maybe a few other ones. There was a bunch of examples mitzvahs say that either are or are not Zman Groma. And Nashim are Chayiv or Potter them, from which, if you mix these all together, we come up with this rule that if it's a mitzvah is Zman Groma, Nashim are Potter, and if it's not Zman Groma, Nashim are Chayiv. He says and therefore, we learn all the other mitzvahs from those. Okay, Tefillin is the main one, but we learn all the other mitzvahs from those. See, so Chassam Sofer says that rule of a lady being parted from mitzvah seishes man groma is only when it's doimet to tefillin and all these other ones, which are all, if I could use the word, pure mitzvah say. And the mitzvah tefillin is, you have to take these things and wrap them on your hand. You have a mitzvah say to do something. He says, but a lav haba mechlala say, something that's structured as a mitzvah say, but obviously the Torah is trying to tell you to not do something, because b'charish or b'katcha tishbais. Okay? The Torah is not telling you to just sit there. The Torah is saying is, don't plow. It's saying it in a positive way, rest from plowing, but the Torah really means to say is, don't plow. So the structure is doing in a positive way. The charish of a tishbais, or you should be mafkir what the land gives you, but that's not the same kind of an assay as wearing tefillin or hakel or eating matzah, which are all pure. They just mean is you're required to do the following thing. These psukim are not telling you to do something, they're telling you to not do something. Well, not do something is, we won't call it a less essay because we're going to say, but it's not the same as a real essay, and therefore that rule of nashim being put from mitzvah seishes man groma doesn't apply to these kind of things. Okay, this is not going with the mitzvah. It's not that kind of a mitzvah. All the examples the Gemara brings are pure essays. Okay, they have a mitzvah of hakel. Okay, you have it at the right time. Everyone has to get together. So that's an example of a mitzvah seishes man groma. Okay, but these kind of things he says has nothing to do with it, and therefore there's no shaila that nashim machayim because it's not a traditional mitzvah seishes man groma. Okay, now he says it for beer also. Not so clear about that. Beer, the mitzvah of beer, which is not so clear what David was referencing before him. The mitzvah, there's a few parts of the mitzvah of beer, and it's a big machlokes rishonim. We'll talk about it. What the mitzvah of beer is, and he's making it that's a mitzvah. That's like a mitzvah. You're not supposed to do something, which is you're not allowed to eat the produce after the time of beer came. Okay, well, other people think that the mitzvah of beer is you have to take it and put it out of your house. You have to be mafkir. That's more traditional, I say. So, what that part of it is not as clear. But the other parts of it, resting on your land and being mafkir, those are more. Okay, one last thing, another topic, and that is like this. Last thing that we have to say about time, and that is, we all know that every 2 or 3 years, there's an extra month, Shana Mubaris, and the Gemara says that you're not allowed to make a Shana Mubaris on Shemittah. The Gemara talks about whether you're allowed to make it on Motzei Shvius also, but that we paskin you're allowed to. But the thing is, you're not allowed to make Ibriyar on Shemittah. And of course the question is, the way our calendar works, which is set up by 7 times every 19 years, of course it happens that it comes out. It happened last Shemittah. Okay, last Shemittah there was 13 months instead of 12 months. Okay, so what happened? It's a Gemara says it, it's brought down halacha that you're not allowed to make extra month during Shemittah. So how come it is? It's sort of automatic. If you do it 7 times every 19 years, you're going to bump into Shemittah all the time. It happened last time. Tafshin Peicha, Samach Ches, Samach.
So then I'm Bezdin not to go ahead and sit down and decide to make a Shemittah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's within a Bezdin.
So what? So whoever set it up originally set it up. No, it's a Rabbanim. Therefore what? So how could they originally say there's going to be Shemittah in Tavshin, Samach, Ches, what's it last time? Oh, whatever it was. Anyhow, 6 years ago, there was Shemittah, and that was going to come out to be on. It was going to be Dibri on that year when the din is you're not supposed to make it.
So the Kashrus is not on the Shemittah, obviously. The Kashrus is on the calendar.
On the calendar.
Make a calendar. How did he make a calendar?
Yeah, so it's right, correct. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you 3 explanations, 3 shittas and rishonim as to what the reason is why you're not allowed to have an Ibriyar on Shemittah. Okay, and we'll have better or worse explanations to answer this question based on the 3 shittas. Okay, the first is Rashi.
Who is the question?
Who asked the question? No, I don't know. I don't remember specifically how many people actually asked the question, but it stares you in the face. Now this year it doesn't bother you as much, but 6 years ago. Anyhow, so you'll see what the answers are. You'll see. Okay, Rashi says, what's the reason why you can't have an Ibriyar in Shvius? What's the reason? Why can't you do it? See, he says it is because during Shemitah you can't work the land. You have all these restrictions on Shemitah. He says so. Chazal said, come on. Why do you have to torture people? Why don't make an extra month then? It's hard enough to have Shemitah as it is. So make your extra month different. You can make it whatever you like to. So why would you have to make it this year? Okay, that's how Rashi learns.
So can't do it.
What did you say?
Obviously, it can't do it.
Because?
Can't do it the next year, so let's switch it over.
Why can't do it the next year? Why? When
you do it on the calendar.
When Hillel said, because David, when Hillel said the calendar, he didn't keep that in the cheshbon. He made a whole calendar, and he didn't keep in mind that you can't have an Ibriyar.
Okay, this is the calendar. When it's Shemittah, they'll put you over.
No, or there's something else. I don't know what he could have done. David.
It's an 18-year cycle.
So then he should have come up with something else. Unless you tell me
Yeah,
it's
not
not.
here. So I gotta come down to Shemittah, move it over here. That's fine.
So that doesn't always work, but no, so
Why can't it always work?
it can't always work because there are things that have to be. Right. So the
we're looking at this 2 years from now.
You gotta make it earlier.
okay. So I don't know the real answer for the first and third thing I'm going to tell you, but the Rambam says if the Rambam brings this din that you now have an extra month during Shemittah, in the next halacha he says that if Bezin has to add the extra month because of the Tekufa and other certain scheduling things, you can look in there. It's a shiloh exactly what he means. He says in that case the Gemara wasn't talking about. Okay, which is to say that those things are too important. Those things are too important, and whatever the reason is why you're not allowed to make an extra month in Shemitah, is overridden by certain of the reasons. The Gemara in Sanhedrin gave all kinds of reasons why you're ma'avid the Shana. And the Rambam says, for certain one of those, overrides the concern about doing during Shemitah. I don't know what the makar is for that, but I'm sure there is. But he said, so those override it. So, the reason why we have our leap years have nothing to do with all the other reasons. Our reasons are totally to do with the Tekufa. We don't do it because it's going to be rainy and people are not going to walk to be on the regal. Hill didn't have Nevuah to decide which years that was going to happen. It was just, it's all because of the Kufa. Okay, so all of our reasons for getting it in are going to fit to that. And so the reasons why, so the Ram says, you're allowed to add on an extra month. You're allowed to have it during Shemittah if that's the reason why they're being ma'avid the Shana. Okay, so we're all up. Okay?
So the Kashrus is nice.
So, in effect, it's going to end up being, according to this, it's like the Gemara, well, now, it's a little funny, because in times of the Gemara, they were not doing Makadosh Chodesh. So we're saying is, we're going to say is, the din is, you're not doing Shemitah. There's an exception that the Rambam says. I don't think the Gemara says an exception. And we sort of fell into something. Yeah, so the rules I'm saying. And for my third answer, I'm going to say the same thing. But for the second one, the Rambam himself says that's not the reason why you can't have an extra month in Shemitah. Okay? He says the reason why you can't have an extra month in Shemitah is because during Shemitah everything is hefker. He says if everything is hefker, people will take what they want to, and the Mela, there's not going to be any barley around to make the carbon armor, because everyone will have chopped it up. So if you have an extra month, you're giving people more chances to take the stuff before time comes to the carbon armor.
Is the original slot?
Yes, as far as I know. He says, but if you, I should check and say if I find out, maybe it's not. But if you're gonna, so this way, if Pesach comes out earlier, because you don't have an extra month, the barley will just be coming ripe, so Bezin will be able to chop some barley in order to make the carbon armor. Okay? So, Chaim Kanievsky over there, this is in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, Shekel HaChodesh, says, that then doesn't apply, that whole reason then doesn't apply if there's no carbon armor. Okay? He wants to suggest, he says, he doesn't have a right, he says, maybe that shouldn't apply when there's no carbon armor, so we made a calendar for the time when there's no Beis HaMikdash, so then you can make your calendar whatever you want to. So it's not because we're making our calendar based on Tekufa, because that's why we're cheshbon. It's just, well, there's no carbon armor, so big deal. The whole reason we had this is because of carbon armor, no carbon armor today, so they don't have to worry about that. He doesn't have a right. He just says, well, it could be like that. You could wonder that usually Chazal wouldn't set us up like that. Okay? Because listen what's going on here. We have a calendar. Came the beginning of the year, we knew that this year is going to have an extra month to it. What happens if Mashiach comes? Okay, what if Mashiach shows up tomorrow? So we sort of set ourselves up. If the chash is that there's not going to be things around for the carbon armor, in Tafshin Tzamaches, when they had set up already that there's going to be an extra month, they're setting up a potential problem. Okay, they set up that there should be, unless I guess they cancel it. They cancel it. They'll cancel it. But they'll cancel it. Even though it was scheduled to be in here, everyone send your calendar that, but we cancel it. Okay, I guess so. Okay.
Let's have a check out after the Shemittah season, before Pesach, right?
After Shemittah season, okay, so.
Those 2 weeks. Right, and the whole Gemara is
right, you can't.
Actually, Shemittah is something that night, right?
Right. So you say maybe it'll happen in those 2 weeks. Okay, right. Maybe that's too much pushing it. Okay.
I have a friend, whenever he gets a calendar, he flips it to Av to see what it says there. If it says fast of Av, he says Av Kashrus.
Okay, that's one.
You can't say it. You guys want to find it.
He uses the shawls. Okay, the last I wanted to tell you what.
Fast. Not every fast.
Fair question also. Okay. Okay. No. What I just mentioned was in Shekel HaKodesh. It's like the Derech HaMunah, but it's on Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. Okay. So too if you want to. Anyhow, it's Rambam's on top and on below it says Pirush. It looks like a Mishnah Berurah. That's what it looks like. Anyhow, the Yad Ramah says he brings Rashi and Rambam. He doesn't bring them by name because he's about to argue with them. But he says there are those who say that these are the reasons for why you can't make an extra month during Shemittah. He says, but it's not. He says, I don't know what to tell you. He says, if you look at Yerushalmi in Shkolm says that that's not the reason. He says, if you look in Yerushalmi in Shkolm, it says that the reason is because during Shemittah there's no Trumas or Meisers. We'll get to that one day. There's no Trumas or Meisers. So Chazal didn't want you to be potter from Trumas or Meisers for an extra month. So therefore, they said no extra months during Shemittah, no leap years during Shemittah, because you'll miss a month of Trumas or Meisers. Okay, 1 month of produce won't have to be chayv in Trumas or Meisers, and therefore no Shemittahs. Okay, so we can only guess. I'll give you the same answer as the first one. When Shemittah Kufa, there might be reasons that override that. If the Rambam said in Shemittah Kufa you could do it, so Kenzan he agrees to that you can override that. Okay, so I'd have to tell you, but two angles. First is Chaim Kanievsky in the same place in Hilchos Kodesh Chadish says, if you look at the Yerushalmi, it's not so clear that the Yerushalmi reads the way the Yad Ramah reads it. And not to say he can't be. He has a bunch. If the reading of the Yerushalmi itself is not so poshut, that the Yerushalmi, when it says that point of being hefker during Shemittah, it's not so clear that it's going to explain that this is explaining that. And he asks all kinds of kashrus on it, all kinds of kashrus on the Yerushalmi, the way the Yad Ramah learns it. And he says that that's not what it means, or at least we'll say is the Rambam and Rashi, did not understand Yerushalmi that way. And it's not so clear at all. This ride that he's bringing from the Yerushalmi, he's not making up the reason. He says there are those who say this, but what can I tell you? The Yerushalmi says not like that. It's not so clear. The Yerushalmi says not like that. Okay, and we could just that's so he's not. So, in other words, don't feel bad for Rashi and Rambam that they said not the Yerushalmi. It's not so clear. The Yerushalmi says that. Okay, and also on a practical level, it's not so clear also what he means. He's saying is, if we add an extra month, then we're going to lose a month of Trumas or Meisers. Okay, it's not really such an accurate thing because things grow once a year. So the apples that grow during the Shemitah year are the apples that grow during that year. If the year is a little longer or a little shorter, does it really make such a difference? There are some things that are going to cross the line. They're going to be potter or chayev based on exactly how long the year is. Because we talked last time that the year gets counted depending on where they picked or when they grew a third or when they did their thing. So there are some that'll get down. But the overall, it's not like you're going to lose so much by getting an extra month. Apples grow once a year. So either they're going to grow in the 6th year or the 7th year period. If you're eating on 6 months of the year, yeah, you get a lot more. But in 1 month, it's hard to hear that you really gain so much. What Rashi said is that people can't work on the land. You get it. It's 1 more month that you can't work on the land. To say that you're potter from Trumas or Meisers, it doesn't sound so convincing that there's really such a difference between what you can get during that extra month. It's not such a difference what you get on. Okay.